Welcome to the ACM West 2013 pre-conference on limbo. Daniel Krozek, a late addition, will be showing us how to limbo in about 5 minutes.
I can go as low as 6'2". That's about as far as you guys put your hands up and put a poll across.
Going digital workflow will be what we're talking about today, and we're going to try to, that's kind of a broad palette, and so we'll probably go around the room and try to see why you're here and some of the questions that you have. My name is Todd Thayer. I'm the Executive Director of Community Access Partners at Sandwich Ventura CAPS in Ventura, California. With a background in broadcast, I'm a bit of an engineer and a bit of a few other things, but that's how I always get roped into these technical sessions. Someday they'll let me do an accounting. We have a great panelists, yeah. Well, you know, you go through your first audit, you know, your functional expense analysis has to be done correctly. That's, you know, it's important. We have a good panel for you today. We have Mark Perry, we have Daniel Krozek, and we have, Mark Taylor, Daniel Krozek, and Chris Perry. I have them in my head, they just weren't quite associated the way they were.
We're also at the table.
Dyslexia is a terrible disease.
Yes, it is. Yes, is it? Sorry. Daniel is not Steve Israelski, nor is he the vice president.
That is regarding to concern. I was also not prepared to be on this panel, but Steve did a big favor for me this morning, and my return favor as of 10 minutes ago is trading places with him in the audience. So,
but Daniel has done quite a bit of bit manipulation in his career, so we'll get there. I'd like to take a minute, if we could, and just kind of work through the room. The broad title, and if you read, someone with a huge marketing background wrote that couple of paragraphs there. But we really need to kind of know what it is you need. Why are you here? What resources can we provide? Because, you know, we could give you a lot of information, but if it doesn't apply and help you solve real world problems, then we're not doing our jobs. And the ACM West, we really want to make sure that we're, you know, sharing information, sharing experience and things that work and things that don't work. So, Chris, we can start with you.
Chris Pierce from the Media Center in Palo Alto, and we've already started making the jump into the digital world. In fact, we recently installed the Dolby Microcaster that I spent so long making that decision that Daniel there started selling it to me, and Chris there finished selling it to me.
I only spent 2 years on that project, so it wasn't like a big time investment.
I was probably only 18 months.
But eventually it seemed like a good idea. And but I'm here more because the next step is going to be to redo our studio. So I'm thinking more about acquisition in the studio and then workflow through the studio, and maybe stirring in some post-production, and then hopefully we've got the back end taken care of with our system. So that's what I'm at.
I'm Sally Rain, and I'm a tech. I work with Chris at the Media Center, and I also work at Hillsborough Television Station, which is a school-based system. And I work in a studio where it's been designed to have like 13 or 14 kids putting on news programs every day, and having all of that talk to each other is what I doesn't always talk about.
Yes.
I'm Paula Schultz, and I'm one of the board members that's here from Home Community Coordinating, here to learn and share.
I'm Nancy Richard. I'm Executive Director of PAC TV in Plymouth, Massachusetts. I know I'm on the wrong coast right now, but I like being here.
Sure, you're on the correct
I'm on the wrong coast. The reason I'm here is that even though I'm the Executive Director of a fairly large access center, I think it's really important for me as the person who makes decisions, the ultimate decisions about what equipment we buy and all of that, to have a good theoretical knowledge of what we have. We have a tightrope system. We manage 6 channels in 4 different towns. They're going all over the place. And we have a guy on our staff, a lot of you know him, Dan Rodriguez, who is our engineer. But I think that it's important to go in a direction that you can actually push a few buttons and have things work. I find that he spends an awful lot of his time fixing things that are broken, connections that are broken. I'm not talking about physical ones, I'm talking about connections between this software and that software that don't work properly or don't line up right. And so he spends a lot of time doing that, and I think that that's a shame, especially when you've got limited access funding. You don't really, a lot of the smaller centers don't have the money to spend on high-end technology engineers that can fix stuff like that. You should be able to go into the studio and acquire video into a whatever and have it shipped up to the server and be able to program it fairly smoothly and rationally. And if you can't do that, then we need to look at ways to do that, no matter what kind of systems you have. We have digital equipment everywhere. Why doesn't it all talk to each other? Why doesn't it work? Why can't we get all 6 of our channels to work properly all the time with very little kerfluffle? So that's why I want to hear.
Yes, sir.
So I'm Nick Brandt, Technology Director for CMAP in Gilroy and CTV in Santa Cruz. We've gone through our digital transition, I'm happy to say, and I'm here to make sure that we're doing everything possible. I'm pretty sure we are. If we haven't done it already, we're on the roadmap to do it, and I just want to make sure, with all the minds in the room, that we have done everything possible.
Okay. Chevelle, we're just going around introducing ourselves. So while you're here, what questions you might want to have answered? Put you on the spot.
What questions do I want to have answered? My name is Chevelle with Pasadena Media, and I want answers. I think for me, it's kind of more about what everyone else is doing, just to make sure that systems are compatible, so that you can bridge the divide between the people bridging the divide.
Sir?
Frank Merschkow from the Creed TV San Jose. We did a transition in digital already. Just want to listen and see what you guys have to offer and share. Just be an observer and just see what's going on in the rest of the facilities.
Okay.
Juan Cerna, access facilitator and producer at Creed TV. Basically, yeah, same thing. We kind of went the digital route already, but just kind of see if I could chime in or just listen to see what you guys might be dealing with.
Sure. Ma'am?
I'm Brigitte Radcliffe. I'm a producer with Boike, work with Jay, and I'm here to learn how to properly set up an infrastructure. My first language is French, so if I don't speak English that well.
Well, yes, sir.
Michael Radcliffe, primary duty being her husband, secondary duty being a nubile and woefully ignorant director at Hawike. I want to actually see if I can understand something about the actual technical workings of the station and expect to have the same glazed look that I had in high school physics most of the day. Thank you.
I'm Kano Palama from Hawike Quiet Community Television. I'm on the production staff, and my coworker actually does the programming, but I guess it's good to know as much as you can about what's going on. So, and I know Daniel a little bit.
Just a little.
Yeah. And that's it.
There's not much to know.
It's like 6'4" to know.
Not if you're slouching. I'm Jay Robertson. I'm the managing director at Hawike, part of this large Hawaiian contingent this year. We use Telview, which was sold to us by Daniel, so no conflict there. But
I won't apologize from the stage for anything.
One of the things that really was our ambition was to go to digital, make that transition, and it took us a while. But now that with the Telview system, we are fully integrated into that, and I just am here to find out what we may be missing, how we could improve. Some of the glitches, I do have questions about reporting, but I doubt that's going to get answered.
Oh, we got 2.5 hours. Don't be surprised.
This is a 2.5-hour panel.
Oh, that favor just got bigger.
You didn't know how big a favor you were giving, did you?
Oh my goodness.
But I'm interested in where we're going. Obviously, you know, the digital was the mantra, let's catch up to that, so what's tomorrow? And so I know there are a lot of new products, services, and softwares, and let me have it.
So I'm Steve Israelski with Tightrope Media Systems, and I was supposed to be up there in Daniel's spot, but we hired Daniel a few weeks ago, and I figured he'd be much better for replacement.
You will regret that.
It's certainly much more exciting to have him up there than me. And so I'm just going to be listening. I'm kind of interested to hear basically what you all are interested in and what your challenges are. It'll be good education.
Okay, and we have someone who just came in. Just tell us who you are and what you're here, what you're hoping to get out of the band.
I'm Steve Klein. I'm on the board of Kauai Television in Hawaii, island of Kauai, and I'm just hoping to learn more throughout the conference as far as what's new, the technology of today, and how we can better work together, you know, as a board back in Hawaii. So.
All right.
So somebody in the back of the room.
Oh yes.
Can't
Hi.
get out.
I'm just with KMVT. I'm here helping record, so it sounded more interesting than Divka. So.
That doesn't let you off the hook. Yeah, and it makes this is important to the rest of us who are actually not working but also working.
All right, so I'm going to, I'm not the oldest guy in the room, I hope, gosh. But I can tell you that in my career, I actually ran film live on the air at a broadcast facility. And so I've seen a wide swath of technological changes. And so the first thing that when this thing came up and the whole concept of workflow and the fact that we had 2.5 hours to film, is going to lead me to a provocative question. Why digital? And let's start there. For 60 years, we ran along with a perfectly good, we ran along with NTSC. And for those of you who are familiar with NTSC, that's an inside joke. But why, what was the driver behind going from analog to digital? Chris, why don't you take a shot at that?
Because everything digital is better.
Okay, so so the first premise, I think, is digital is better. But I can tell you that I used to run 2-hour reels of high-band quad that made a picture more beautiful than anything you've seen on YouTube. Okay? So digital isn't always necessarily better. Daniel, what was the other reason for going digital?
From the manufacturers trying to sell new things. It's like 3D TVs. You need to get a 3D TV. What do you mean your station's not digital? I mean, there's a
market forces. Market forces.
Replacement parts are getting, for the analog equipment, are almost getting as expensive.
Well, okay, but I want to go a little level higher. Why would we want to move from analog to digital?
At Kauai, they almost lost an arm loading the tape robot when somebody hit buttons.
But you can have
so like
digital
safety,
tape.
lower
Okay,
insurance.
I'm going a level higher. The reason everybody went digital, okay, there's 2 primary drivers for going digital. Okay, it's reproducible. Okay, if you have a digital file, you can make a clone of a digital file, and in theory, everything else working, it's going to be exactly the same. How many of you have done 3rd or 4th generation 3/4 or VHS stuff? Not the same. One of these things is no longer like the other. Digital was reproducible. The other thing that you got with digital was compression. Okay? But those 2 things, reproducibility and compression, are variables in quality that take the quality of digital sometimes lower than the original analog. And so as we begin this discussion, I kind of wanted to set that as a frame. When we deal with digital processes and digital workflow, you are balancing size, reproducibility, size being bandwidth, so storage size is one, transmission size is another, reproducibility and quality. And there's, this thing that'll move around on the table. YouTube's great if you only want a 320 by 180, window. And as we go through things today, realize that there's always a trade-off. when we start talking about transmission, when we talk about acquisition formats. And so, as an overview, and then we're going to get into our panelists, I want to talk briefly. When you break down digital workflow, you can break it down into roughly 3 categories: acquisition, content prep or content management, post-production, and distribution. Okay? And the gurus at all the places that come up with them design file formats that are very specific to those 3 nodes of work. AVCHD is a great acquisition format, very highly compressed, you record it in a camera. Yeah. Doesn't do so well when you try to edit it. Okay? Apple ProRes is a great editing format. Apple ProRes HQ, which Chris may tell you an anecdotal story, is probably not a very good distribution format. Very bulky, I'd say. And so when we look at the 3 nodes, acquisition, post-production or content prep, and distribution, you're going to find that there are tools and there are formats and there are systems and software for each node that make it work a little better. Okay? Does that make sense? A lot of the problems that I see people that come into my access center, they want to know, how come I can't edit my beautiful MP4 video that came off my iPhone? You know, I tried to edit it and the cut jumped, 3 seconds long, and they don't understand what a long GOP, does anybody know what a GOP is? Okay, long GOP group of pictures. It's how you get highly compressed formats. That doesn't make them very editable. And so those are these trade-offs that we've talked about. Right now then, having kind of set the table for kind of the things that we're talking about, I'm going to go ahead and start. Mark, why don't we start with you?
All right.
And he's got a little bit of a case study of the migration that they just went through.
Can I just ask, would you put archiving under content management?
No, put it under distribution.
Distribution.
Distributing to a file or someplace else.
The proverbial file drawer.
The proverbial file. We'll get there, absolutely. And you've got front end and back end archiving. So there's a whole lot of workflow there to talk about.
All right. You want me to go to the...
Yeah.
All right.
You got your presentation? Show some slides.
I'll show a couple of things up once we get to it. I just want to do a brief overview. I started with the station as a volunteer about 10 years ago. At that point, we were still playing back off of SVHS tapes. I remember when I started out there, shows were doing editing, linear editing, tape to tape. We had some software, I don't recall the name, but and that's how we added visual effects, graphics, lower thirds, and all of that. At least that was in the post. We had Deco for the live productions. Sometime later, they finally got an MVP 2000 from Electronics, and we were able to do digital PSAs. So between shows, you could air PSAs off of this digital server, which sped up programming time and all of that. But of course, you could only add content with a very specific codec. It didn't matter whether it was a very nice codec with some other system, but if it wasn't that very specific codec, it would not work on the system. So being able to have a proper workflow where everybody knew you had to transcode it to MPEG-2, you couldn't get it on the system. We then eventually got DVD decks as well, so we moved from SVHS to DVD. That was a major improvement, made playback a lot quicker, and the systems allowed us to, we didn't have to rewind the tapes all that often.
More rewinding, that was a pretty big move towards digital.
So that DVDs also gave us another option. We started using editing systems because you can now edit on a computer and then create a DVD straight out of the computer rather than going from tape to tape. Now, yes, you could export to a tape off of a timeline or something, but it really wasn't feasible, and we were just barely getting the staff to understand how to do nonlinear editing, and hard enough to get the producers to learn that stuff. Nowadays, though, we've got all sorts of fun iMovies and all that, so it's a lot easier. But we're also now looking at a transition from people submitting DVDs, and our station has purchased a TelView Hypercaster and a NewTek TriCaster. That's gonna mess with my speaking in a little bit as I mix up those, but we are now able to capture directly on the TriCaster in our studio. We have a digital file that gets transferred to a hard drive, and then depending on whether it's captured in the correct format, it can be uploaded to our Hypercaster very quickly. It can actually be set up to go over the network, and there's stuff I need to be careful about, allowing producers to do that. So we can probably discuss that later. The idea being that we now have it so that a producer can walk into our studio, do a 3-camera shoot. We can give them all 3 cameras recorded individually, plus the program feed. They can go home, make any changes or edits that they want using whatever editing software. They can then, with the Hypercaster, they can either send it to us over the internet, assuming they have a decent internet speed, or they can walk it in and hand it to us on a DVD or a flash drive. Those 3 options are very convenient for a lot of people, but we are still receiving a lot of DVDs because we have import producers who their workflow is to produce a DVD. And adding a digital file to that isn't always convenient. So maintaining some backwards compatibility is still very much an essential aspect of our station. Then of course there's training, people submitting proper formats and whatnot. And that gets into the media management aspect at the station, where we have to make sure that whatever file formats they're giving us, we can transcode those so that they come out at the format that we want to play back. And so that's roughly the route that we've taken with the station. We are still evolving. We are only upgraded about half of the equipment because it is a rather substantial cost to upgrade all of the equipment. So we've chosen to go in several phases. So the TriCaster allowed us to upgrade. It'll take analog inputs, and so we can take those analog inputs, do analog outputs, and so it fits into the current studio without really affecting the other systems too much. Now, we did replace our 15 monitor setup. We have probably a ton of monitors up there, CRTs, 8 inches up to 24-inch monitors. And they were huge, they were bulky, they used up a ton of electricity. And they just looked old. They were all 4x3. Now,
Really good for X-ray imaging.
yes,
And keeping the room warm, right?
very warm. We've
Oh, it's
now,
cold in here now that we got rid of all those.
yes, that is actually a rather common complaint. There's also now a huge hole. We had a huge hole in the wall so that we could access the back of all of those. We've now moved to a single 60-inch LCD monitor that just barely covers it, and so we've got a huge draft between the 2 rooms. And the other room is our playback room, so that one has an AC going all the time because we've got a lot of equipment in there that needs to stay cool. So it's just a matter of upgrading the equipment at the cost ranges that you can afford at any one time. But you're also looking at equipment that can fill your needs without displacing too much equipment. The more equipment you displace as you're upgrading, the more trouble you're going to have when, and I mean when, the problems start occurring. we chose to go with when we did the playback system, I actually kept our old playback system running in a very basic format until I got the new system up and running. We then were down for a couple of hours as I swapped over cables to turn on the old system, and it started running. Now, because we're using a hypercaster and it's an IP streaming system over our network, that did cause a few hiccups, as for myself, I actually started full-time with the station about 5 years ago, and everything I know I learned either from talking with the vendors or just Googling it. So having staff that can Google this stuff, it really helps knowing how to go to the forums. At least that's how I learned a lot of this. So that was my process on it. And so I don't know the whole gamut of the stuff because I don't work with tons of different systems. I just work with ours, but that also helps me to focus on getting the specific issues that we've run across fixed. I think that covers most of it.
Okay. So one of the things that Mark's experience points out is you can have a hybrid system. You can, given budget constraints, physical constraints, a lot of different things, take and do a piecemeal approach to migration from analog to digital, from SD to HD. There are solutions out there that will allow you to cross that line slowly. Generally, from what I've seen, it tends to happen in post-production first. So the first thing, and most of us have all been through the Final Cut, Premiere, that went HD before anything else. I mean, it just, when we started out with, Final Cut TV, really, we went from analog to digital. That was 13 gigs an hour, standard def, crank it out, analog, digital, done. And then as Premiere and Final Cut migrated up, that post-production environment went HD, and most of us may not have even noticed, because we're still all on standard def. The second phase tends to be an acquisition, usually field acquisition, because you're replacing camcorders, you're going to go from a tape-based system to a file-based system, and there's really no point in putting in a standard definition file-based system. We went ahead and went with the HD systems. And then the next phase could have been either studio acquisition or playback, because now we've kind of got this acquisition and this post-production environment, and we've got this great-looking content, or our studio's been left behind, so we need to get it caught up, or we really need some way to show the world what we have. Oh, those pesky cable operators, if they'd only give us HD channels, we could really show them what we're made of. So one of the things that Mark's process shows is that you can do it piecemeal. First of all, you don't have to look at it and say, I've got to do this all at once, number one. Number two, it shows that there are specific sequences that are probably beneficial to happen first, and there's a sequencing of that can occur. Gentlemen, who would like to go first?
I'm still new at the job and new to this panel, so I don't have a formal presentation.
Right. We'll let Chris
just
go.
talk for a bit, but I don't want to.
Now to make something up.
Yeah, I think we start taking some notes here.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris Perry. I'm the Director of Systems Engineering at Telview. Before Telview, I was the 6 and 11 o'clock Technical Director at WBZ, which is the CBS affiliate in Boston. So I'm more of a transplant out of broadcast television news than I am anything else. And I'd like to thank Daniel personally for delivering me a room full of Telview users. This is fantastic.
I didn't know where you were going.
Wow.
You started thanking me personally. I was like,
I didn't think I was going to need to say some kind of vendor thing, but that's okay. We'll keep going.
I worked for Telview. Just to be really clear, I was a Telview employee for 6.5 years. So.
And now where are you?
I don't have a job. I work for Tightrope as of October 1, so it's everybody is free to give me crap as much as they want. I'm now used to it, having just done a conference 2 weeks ago with the ACM Northeast. Anyway,
it's Chris.
Yeah, no, I just wanted
Your
to.
fault for involving me. So.
A couple of things, and sort of probably echoing some of the sentiments that Mark has. I mean, and what Todd was saying, there's definitely an order to doing things, and with any system that's going to get deployed these days, you can definitely piece it together as you go along. Obviously, turnkey, if you can afford it all at once, is nice, and if but exactly, it's not exactly practical all the time for all facilities. I work in a lot of facilities that have, they upgrade their cameras in their studio, and it costs them $90,000. And it leaves no money left for the rest of the $90,000 of equipment that they need to power the control room. So they buy $900 of down converters and take these beautiful HD cameras and stuff them into their 14-year-old Echo Lab switcher. And it gets you through that budget year. And then that's really sort of, one of the theories that we have to start embodying is how you can go from starting with X and ending up with everything that you want, and building it as you go along. One of the easiest things, for example, to add to any sort of facility is web streaming, because it's all downstream. So you can build an entire broadcast system, and then later on say, okay, well, we're going to do web streaming, and we're going to add it. We've drummed up support for it, we've got the funding for it, and we're going to tack this onto the project at a later date. And what you're going to end up with is you're going to end up with a community that now appreciates the fact that you're producing higher quality content, and it's now distributed in a linear VOD format on the web. You also have the options, of course, of YouTube, Vimeo, and the 4 dozen other web services that people use these days. But regardless, one of the things that I spend a lot of my day talking about, I spend 90% of my day not talking about the products W sells, is the idea behind a total workflow for files. And it all starts with a network. You need to have a well-constructed network. Because without a well-constructed network, you're going to end up with, major problems. You're going to be chasing ghosts all day, and you're not really going to get anywhere. So starting with a well-established network, even if you have to bring in a network consultant temporarily, just to get you over the hump, and buying high-quality networking equipment, because good networking equipment will get you a heck of a lot longer than you think. Not that I'm suggesting you don't buy your network switches from Staples. My father's been an employee of Staples for 20 years. But you're not going to find a high-quality network switch at Staples. You really need to start looking at the Ciscos, the HPs. As media centers, we move significantly more data than most small businesses. And that's a pretty big consideration when you start looking at the fact that you need to save this stuff for the next 20 years, or want to save it for the next 20 years. I'm thinking about facilities as they expand. Sometimes they start off with one little tiny network switch, and then they add another one, and then they add another one, and they add another one, and before you know it, somebody plugs something into something that they're not supposed to, and your whole network goes kaput. So I did a presentation at the ACM Northeast last week. You were there.
Was it that long ago?
2 weeks. 2 weeks, sorry. About networking and the importance of building a network, and how if you start with a good infrastructure and you document the crap out of it, it will really have legs for a very long time. Most networking equipment manufactured these days by at least the big guys, HP, Cisco, Dell, etc., has either lifetime warranties or next day on-site support, or relatively inexpensive long-term service contracts that will assist in keeping everything together and up to date. We recently hired a new director of network operations at Telview, and prior to us, he worked at banks. So banks, all they do is transfer numbers all day, and numbers are infinitesimal compared to the size of video files. So he starts working with us, and it took him about 2 weeks before he went, "What are you guys doing with all of this video?" And then he went, "Oh, I work for a video company now." And getting beyond that sort of, our network connects us to the internet, is very important for access centers, and getting to the point where your network is now the core of your entire operation and is the single most important piece of the puzzle is really on our doorstep, because without it, you are sneaker netting media across the facility. So building a network, step one, in my opinion. Number two is you got to start working with some of the software packages that are out there. Todd and I were having a discussion earlier. There are some really, really great, powerful transcoding applications available in the market today. We work extensively with Telestream and their Episode platform. Build yourself a high-power Episode box. Episode is a transcoder, so it's like Compressor or Adobe Media Encoder, except it does a much, much better job of actually creating high-quality files. There's also Harmonic Pro Media Carbon, which is another platform that's been through like 17 different hands, but again, another very, very high-quality platform that if you run it on a well-built machine, you end up with something that you can, a great utility within your facility to be able to take this weird file format that somebody brought in and make it into something that you can actually work with. And that was something else that Todd and I think probably want to talk about is you've got different buckets of media. You've got the media that comes in, and you've got your editing media, and they might be the same. You might be acquiring media on the same format that you're editing on, if you're fortunate. Maybe you're acquiring media in one format and has to be converted to another format to edit. And then ultimately you have your broadcast formats or your distribution formats, which are going to be your smaller, more compressed media, but is not stuff that you can easily take off your server, drop back into an editor, chop the ends off, and put it back in. And the reason these broadcast formats are so incredibly important is because of space. So if you figure that DV video at 13.6 gigs an hour for standard definition NTSC, you know, you multiply that times 1,000 hours, and you have a tremendous amount of media that you now have to manage and maintain. However, if you compress that media to an MPEG-2 or an H.264 based codec, we can take that and drop the media size in half or in a quarter or even smaller depending on the codec that's selected. So finding a format for each of your various pieces that works in your environment and sticking to it and being able to put policies and procedures in place to be able to support that workflow is very, very important. And something like an Episode or a Harmonic Pro Media Carbon will assist in that. Episode is just about $1,300 for those of you wondering. Harmonic is about $6,000, and I think you have to pay the yearly support of about, I think it was $800 a year for the support and the licensing and whatnot. So there are some associated costs with building something out, but you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck with a professional turnkey application that has technical support over something like an FFmpeg or a Handbrake where you're sort of piecemealing it together, trying to make something work, and maybe you have to jump through 3, 4, or 5 intermediate steps in order to get a file that actually works. So just a couple of big thoughts there in terms of build a good network and then deploy software packages and hardware to be able to support the fact that you want to go all file-based. I would be the happiest person in the world if they killed the DVD tomorrow.
Oh,
yeah.
Just because, you know, just because it's one of those things. You know, I mean, DVDs, like magnetic tape, have a shelf life. Interesting factoid: NASA now has more magnetic tape in their libraries than they can read before the tape degrades. So even if they started today reading that tape and digitizing it, the tape would literally disintegrate before they could read all of it to convert it to digital. So finding a format and being able to stick with its importance. I know somebody brought up archiving and sort of archiving workflows, which we can get to later. You know, finding an archiving workflow that works for you. I know the community media, the archive.org project, there we go. Thank you. Community Media Archive project is very popular in certain circles. There's also professional turnkey style solutions, something like an Amazon Glacier, where you're now paying Amazon basically to store it on their vast array of storage servers and tape libraries that they maintain in redundant co-location facilities. So if the West Coast falls off the face of the earth, at least the East Coast still has your media. We love you guys though. So just a couple of higher level things, and I do have some drawings here that we can start getting into if questions get specific.
So, and again, there's some information there. First of all, I would say, and I appreciate what Chris said about the top tier, but you can also in the second tier networking gear, but you want to go to the professional level of some of these things. I personally, I think I've only bought D-Link switches in the last 15 years, but I make sure I'm buying the higher end. one of the things that you need to understand when you go and look at the specifications of network switches is they have a switching fabric. What is the capacity of that unit overall? It's a gigabit switch. Because you can buy a gigabit switch that has 4 gigabit switching fabric across 12 ports. Or you can buy a gigabit switch that has 200 gigabit switching fabric across 16 ports. Which one's going to give you better performance? Obviously the one with more throughput. So, part of it is being an informed consumer. Obviously you get more support because there is more labor involved, they charge more. And so that's the trade-off. Similarly with the workflow that he mentioned, you look at, and it's funny when you said harmonic, because I was thinking Rosette. And I thought
it used to be Rosette, and prior to Rosette it was
somebody else.
Yeah, it was somebody else. Harmonic chromediacarbons changed hands like 4 times in the last 5 years.
And you look at that and you say, why would I spend $6,000 on a piece of transcoding software? And I say, because over 5 years, you're going to save $30,000 in staff labor by setting up automation. And so it's a trade-off. How much are you processing? We happen to use Canopus Procoder, which is written by, well, it was actually written by a splinter group of Rosette's carbon coder authors who went off and made a less expensive version, and it's got watch folders, but it doesn't have full automation. And so there's a balancing act here of what's your application, what's your total throughput, what's your staff investment, and looking at that over 3 to 5 years and saying what makes sense.
And if I may echo something, I mean, one thing that I've noticed pretty universally across this community is that the staff labor time is dramatically undervalued.
Yep.
To the point where, I had one discussion, I'll never forget it. It was a guy in Maine who's telling me that this just costs too much, that how can you possibly charge this amount for that product? And then I start diving into it. I'm like, okay, well, imagine your time costs you $125 an hour because you factor in your labor costs, which is a real tangible cost, but then you also have to factor in what you're not doing while you're doing something else. So if you have to spend 6, 10, 12 hours a week screwing around with 5 different transcoding applications, multiply that times 52 weeks a year, then multiply all of your labor times 2 because you're doing that instead of doing something else, and these numbers start to come out to the point where you go, oh my goodness, I'm actually going to be saving money and producing more content by making a certain investment. And it might be in one technology, it might be in a transcoding platform, it might be deciding to go with DSLR cameras over P2 cameras. There's a ton of ways that you can look at this, but trying to make sure that you value that staff component highly enough, because your time is incredibly valuable, and to spend it doing something that a machine could be doing is sort of, it can be silly. And I've seen it all over the place.
Yeah, and then to echo the other thing that Chris said is invest in your network. Don't buy the cheap switches. Go and invest in a 24 or 48 port professional, if not an enterprise class, at least a mid-level business class switch. I bought a mid-level business class 24 port gigabit switch. Would have been 2004 or 5 when I spent a lot, $2,800 I think, back in 2004 or 5. And it's still in service. We just bought a 48 port and we're actually taking it out and putting it in the truck that we're building. But it's 8 years old and it's still chugging right along. And so those investments pay off over time. I guess that's the thing that we would say is that really you can shoot yourself in the foot a lot of different ways by only looking at the immediate problem in front of you. Whenever you're looking at networking and workflow, there's always another layer out, another onion skin that you've got to factor in, or you can factor in. You've got to make that decision as you're looking at it. How much am I willing to take a look at right now?
And I've had arguments with people. They go, well, we've only got 10 computers in our facility right now, or 12 computers in our facility. And I said, yeah, today. But what about tomorrow? So you're going to buy a 16-port switch for 10 computers. That works. It solves the immediate problem. But the suggestion is if you can afford the 48-port switch, buy the 48-port switch. Even if you're only going to use 16 of the ports, you'll find yourself using the rest of them at some point in the near future because you're adding more devices to your network every day. And this is something that's going to run 24/7, 365 for years. So investing in something that has a solid reputation and backbone is very important. Right, Cisco SG300 series switches are something that we've deployed a lot of recently. And $1,000 or so for a 52-port network switch that has a lot of enterprise class features, and it's a real steal for the money.
So, on that subject, this has been the bane of my existence for now 10 years. I was just doing the math, and 10 years ago, I stood up at a regional research conference and said, there's this new thing, and it's called the digital bicycle. This was this open source project I was doing when I was involved. And it's great, we're all gonna go digital, and we're gonna use digital to share all our content, and it's not gonna cost anybody anything, and it's gonna be really easy, and the only thing you need to learn how to do is forward ports on your network. So room full of access executive directors and their operations managers and their tech people. Who here knows what their router is at their station? Who here can log in and get in the password and change things? And at that time, there was not a lot of hand raising, and I see hands in this room now because it's the techies, but I will tell you that at my most recent job that I did for 2 years, we tried to do a lot of demos with people, and they just needed to set up a receiver server and do port forwarding and get into routers. And really about 3 out of 5 of my demos didn't work out because we couldn't get the local network to forward 2 ports, or 3 ports, and have everything work and get static. Because the reality is almost all PEG stations don't have the networking knowledge on staff and in-house to operate, whether it's 8 or 16 or 52 ports, to operate it outside of these. Somebody else set it up, and these things are connected to it. And as long as nothing goes wrong, we're cool, but if something goes wrong, we have to try to figure it out ourselves because we're busy doing other things, we have background on other things. The biggest resource that is not in this field that we have as an asset to use is networking knowledge. And I've also seen stations where they had somebody who was working there part-time for much less than $125 an hour. And they somehow got a more profitable job because they are knowledgeable in networking. And guess what? Most other companies will pay you a lot more than PEG will for that knowledge.
No.
No, it's a surprise. But most PEG stations pay closer to $10 an hour than 125. And so people go, hey, I got this other thing. And you talk to the station and they say, yeah, we had this thing, and it's all set up, and none of us are the ones that do it because that guy left 6 months ago. But we've got this guy we call, and he comes and he kind of helps and he logs in. Even in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is like one of the richest, biggest, they have like an off-site group that helps with their networking, and they pay to do all the networking because the staff who are engineers and in charge of the equipment and the networking find it too hard to make work right with the email filters and spam filters and all this crazy complicated stuff that comes because they're big. So my whole ramble here is to say, when I was selling LiveView, which is what I did the last 2 years, trying to say you can use digital to send content back from anywhere, it's great, it'll work perfectly, let me just get in your station, oh God, here's 2 weeks of tech calls and it's not working right. Or when I was at Telview and trying to help people implement things that were involving more on the network side, or back to Digital Bicycle. The value of the network is big, the value of the networking knowledge is so crucial that you become dependent on it. And if you have a Chris Pierce either working at your station or in a town nearby, you are much safer than when you're relying on a person who has a lot of other responsibilities at this 1.5 or 2.5 person job. And the networking knowledge is just a small part of what they know and do. And if they get another job, suddenly, I mean, the best thing I'd say is everybody in the organization should know how to operate Cisco, but that's not been my experience in 10 years of working with that.
Not quite reality-based.
So anyway, I'll talk more later, but I'll shut it down. That's my, like, oh God, it's never changed.
Yeah,
10 years, we still don't know.
Let me jump on that and then we'll have you address the broader topic. I would say as a systems integrator, and Chris, you can jump in, there are only 4 things you should have, cables types that you should have in your facility. You should have a Cat5e or a Cat6 network infrastructure for your voice and data. You should have a Belden 1505A or equivalent unbalanced network cable called digital video. And you might have a 9451A audio cable, and you might have an RG6 for your network. But you need to start thinking in terms of you're going to move balanced data on a network, you're going to move unbalanced data on a video network, and you might have some of that pesky analog stuff laying around if you haven't done your vetting. But those are really, you're narrowing down to where if you're building or you have a facility, you're building infrastructure. You're building a road so that these cars, these applications, can drive on it and deliver this media for you. And it's important to think about, RCA connectors go away. Everything should be balanced audio. There should only be, Cat 5e or Cat 6 cable. If you've got silver satin laying around, get rid of it, because somebody's going to try to plug a network into it. And it's going to go about that far. And it's going to cause a problem.
Yeah.
And so as you clean house and as you go through and you're thinking about philosophies, we're narrowing things down and we're building very specific, high quality infrastructure paths for the data that we use every day.
And yeah, I stock 4 cable types, literally Cat 6, Belden video cable for SDI transport, and then analog and audio and video cables. And that's all I travel with. And actually, technically speaking, the analog video cable that I use is the same that I use for the digital side, because the digital cable is rated for the analog use anyways. So I just do it in 2 different colors because I'm big on color coding.
All right, Daniel, what do you got for us?
Oh, I gotta talk again? Shit, hold on, I didn't want to. Here's the thing.
Those are jokes.
Neither, really. I'm just rambling until someone gives me the stink eye. Anybody here's a lot of stink eye. Yeah, that's where you give that look that says, shut up, I'm sick of hearing you. I know somebody's got it in reserve. So the point is, the transition to digital has taken stuff that was somewhat simple, although again, we will say it was not perfect. But you could say I take a video cable and 2 audio cables from this device into this router, into this playout, into my modulator, and I think that's been very comfortable for people, whether they actually were video engineers, which 99% of the people like me working at a pink station aren't, but they know that the yellow cable goes in here, and the other yellow one goes in here, and why is the audio not working? Because I only have the red and not the white. But that's I'm trying to be very realistic these days. So I've spent the last 10 years being the optimistic guy going, oh, it's all going to be perfect and easy, and we'll be able to duplicate everything, and there won't be problems, and you just need to get a 16-year-old who knows BitTorrent to come to your station and work for $8 an hour. So 10 years saying that, and it didn't work. So now I'm going, what's more realistic? Oh, how about we actually work with the fact that everybody's got like a limited amount of technical knowledge, and we try to make something that operates at least functional in that situation. So, in that scenario, I am proud to say I love SDI cables because it's one cable that's both video and audio, and you still have a workflow.
No matter what color it is.
No matter what color it is. Though I also like that Chris colored those cables. It was one of the reasons that he became my preferred installer and got
sort of Daniel's old job.
Yeah, I left and said, hey Chris, you should tell Tellview you work for them, but only for this. That's what I thought you were thanking me for.
No, the job's been great. These guys are great too.
So, in essence, what I'm trying to get at here is, I think digital is an important thing, especially across the board for dealing with product management, for being able to back up everything, be able to have that perfect quality transmission from one place to another and not have the herringbone pattern and everything else that's driving you crazy in the analog world. But to take it to the logical extreme that everything has to be numbers and bits over an IP network puts you in a position where you're entirely dependent on both staff knowledge and technology that is not take this cable and it goes to this, why isn't it working, let's change the cable.
Changes troubleshooting too.
Changes troubleshooting, it changes the amount of knowledge you need to have, not just about this one particular product, but the entire workflow. Right. It makes the 2 Chris P's in the room much more valuable than $125 an hour, whether or not anybody is actually paying.
Someone here actually making
No, but it's honestly,
it's pretty much the going rate for an engineer, for
consulting
engineers for networking. I mean, if anyone wants to go make $250,000 a year, go get your CCIE, your Cisco Certified Inter-Networking Expert certification, and you are hireable at any facility that uses Cisco networking gear in the world.
And
You write your own ticket.
And I think you can imagine that's a lot more than the few peg stations who have bought this gear. It's every corporate, it's every. The problem is we're now, whereas in the past we were kind of dependent on knowledge that was somewhat niche to us, like, do you know how to use consumer level gear to try to get a passable picture on there? To now we're dependent on knowledge that is valuable for the finance world, and is valuable for the technology world, for the medical world. And so I am not being like, hey, we shouldn't do that, as much as we should be really aware of, like, when you go that route, it requires, if you're going to be a 1.5 person station, that half person should be a networking genius. All right, if you're going to be a 2.5 person station, you should have a full-time person who's, and that's not sustainable for most of the organizations I interact with. Unfortunately, maybe their current activity is not sustainable either. They're trying to make it on what they're doing. So trying to find a way to reap some of the benefits of digital, but not be entirely dependent on something like that is where I'm focused these days.
And so, I mean, a couple of thoughts here off that. Every town and city in the United States has a network. And that town network is managed by a town employee who knows networking and spends his days dealing with network problems, in between fixing printers, which will die someday, I hope. But using your local high school networking admin, or using the local town IT guy, and just picking up the phone and calling him and saying, hey, we're at the local access center, we're down the street, we do a lot of video stuff, we need a very, very powerful data network. What are you guys using in the high school? High school networks are some of the, especially with the rapid deployment of, the laptop for every student and the iPad for every student. High school networks are more complicated than some corporate level networks, because they have to be able to support 600 devices all watching YouTube at the same time, which is a very, very difficult thing to do for anybody who knows networking at that level. And it requires a tremendous amount of infrastructure and management. So pick up the phone, call them. Hey, what are you guys using? If they're using Cisco gear, maybe you want to look at Cisco, because you have a local expert that you can pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I'm having this problem. Do you think you can spend some time on Thursday afternoon and look at it with me? Or if they're using HP, same thing. But basically trying to match what they're doing in a manner with what you're doing will not only strengthen the bond between you, the town, the city, the school, whatever, but will also help your facility in manners beyond the fact that you might not have a 16-year-old BitTorrent networking genius.
And just an idea of playing off of that thing I got while Chris was talking. Ask them to join your board of directors. Or try to find somebody who's that tech genius that you're never going to be able to pay the hourly rate that they would charge if you were to get them into the station. But then you could then be like, and we want you on our board of directors. And no, you don't have to do the fundraising stuff. You can serve as a member. Like, see if you, if it's a town network and you're already kind of in there to really friendly, bring them donuts and coffee. If you're trying to get them to join your board and contribute overall to the organization, you might need to go a little more extreme. Just donuts and coffee might be a ticket to Comic-Con or some other sort of junket. But if you can get that
World
kind of
Series tickets.
World Series tickets, hey, whatever it takes. If you can get that tied into your organization where it's not an individual that you have at a part-time position, you're still dependent on them sticking around and loving the organization, and they're not always the most friendly people. But if you can get them in, you might have a resource that can help you more so than a part-time employee.
They're only ornery because they're scared.
I didn't know that.
We bite hard. No, with any time that you talk to somebody who's managing a network, their number one concern is security. Most of these guys come out of some sort of a background where security is tantamount to any other thing that they do, including being able to deliver, anything over the network at a good quality of experience. You've got schools locking students out of things like YouTube and Facebook, and their whole life is built around the fact they lock everything down so tightly that you can't fit one little tiny bit through from Facebook, period, end of story. And that's what they center it around. So
their interview process is them saying no to every question.
Yes.
Perfect, you're hired. You know how to say no to everything? You're in charge.
Do you like cats? No.
All right.
Do you like dogs? No. Yeah, but and being able to work with them so that they can understand, because you're working in a more open environment. You're not necessarily worried about your staff Facebooking during the day. Maybe some of your staff work at Facebook part-time. It's just down the street, isn't it?
Yeah. From here.
From here?
All right.
Can I bring up another piece to this,
Sure.
which is, I agree the network is very important, and I do feel blessed that I think I kind of have the network part down. But the bit that I don't have down, which I think is going to become as important as the network, is server administration and management of users and permissions and accessing file servers and the ability to move files between the various systems that are and are we going to have to cross the bridge where all of our users have to have usernames on the network? I mean,
it's going to depend on your philosophy. So let's dig into that a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the physical manifestation. We've talked a lot about theoretical workflow. Okay. Now let's talk about, we're going to take and we're going to send an HD camera. Let's assume it's a Panasonic HMC 150 because I'm familiar with those. It's an SDHC recording device. It records ADC HD. Okay, so it's a highly compressed acquisition format. All right. What are some of the problems that are going to happen when you're deploying for the first time a file-based acquisition format in the field? Okay. That card. They'll back up my card. What do I do with the media on the card after I've uploaded it to an ingest station of some kind? Okay, there's a lot of things that happen right there. Right, you've handed out 2 cards and a camera, and a guy comes back and they're full. And what do I do next? So what do some of you do?
Back it up to the drive.
Okay.
One drive?
I usually put it in at least 2 places.
Are they just attached, like directly attached? So computer, USB cable, drive?
External drive on the actual hard drive for the computer. Our system is fairly antiquated. The hard drive for the computer itself, an external hard drive, and then I like to just keep my own stuff on another external hard drive.
Anyone using network storage arrays already?
Yeah, Al, what do you do?
We're putting everything onto a networked Drobo storage device. Everything's RAID 6. And then when things are finished, they're archived online and then to RAID, local RAID drives.
Okay.
Well, one thing to note about Drobo, you know, I mean, they make a very cool product and it works very well. You tend to see performance issues just based on the fact that it was never really designed for video. You probably want to, you know, I mean, for anyone looking at vast amounts of network storage, I would suggest starting with some of the enterprise, you know, the mid-enterprise level stuff. Yeah, I like a company called Thecus, Thecus.
So there are 2 philosophies that you can go down the road on. The network attached storage, SAN, or a server-based architecture where you have file permissions, logons. Or what we've done in Ventura, and we looked at this. We talked with some folks in Boston that were developing it. We actually have stayed with eSATA individual drives because the drives got so cheap. About the time we were looking at SANs, the price of hard drives took a nosedive.
For those of you who don't know what a SAN is, it's a storage area network.
Plugs into the network.
Yeah, it plugs into the network and gives you a lot of storage available. It's not attached directly to one computer, it's available to all of the computers. And there's a whole bunch of very advanced permissions that you can start to use with some of these SAN arrays.
But that leads to, and I'll jump in here at some point, you do have to have some kind of a username and access permissions for people to participate with a SAN or a NAS. Or you just give everybody carte blanche?
Yeah, give everyone carte blanche.
Really? Okay. So from a security standpoint,
you were a brave man.
You've pushed the management, you've chosen to reduce the management load and decrease the security level at the same time.
Yeah, it's very low security and it gives us a lot of worry, but so far so
Right.
good.
And so we're a small enough
honor code.
We're a small enough shop that we just provide a boatload of 2, 3, 4 terabyte hot pluggable eSATA external drives, and we let people manage it that way. So we're avoiding the management and security issue by assigning a drive, okay? But in our application, as soon as you transfer that card to that drive, they get that one image, then they turn the card back in and they lose that primary. So now you're back down to 1 copy. Okay, so be aware there's some wrinkles in this
Is this one drive per person?
Well, we have a stack. It could be as many as they need for the project. I You're talking 2 or 3 terabytes.
But we'll.
Oh, they're shared. They can be shared
Because
too.
then you run into the problem that the two guys both show up at the same time, but one way to two.
Yeah, but we
projects
can
at
make
once.
it, we can clone it up pretty quick. That hasn't been an issue for us. So, but now you're back to this, now we've recorded this thing in the field and we've come in and we've created this image and we're back down to one image and I still don't have backup tapes. So what we usually do immediately is we create a copy of that AVCHD file structure and blow it out into Apple ProRes as our standard for post-production. And now I have a backup image on AVCHD. The one thing I would say at this point is develop standards. And this is something, again, Chris and I were talking about earlier. I don't really care what the standards are, but at some point, you as facility operators and managers need to say, this is what we're supporting. Because the number of wrappers and parameters on digital files will vary Tightrope and TelView, let alone me or Chris trying to keep track of what's out there. There are too many variables of too many file formats out there.
And then there are variables within the variables, for the format variables. So it's a logarithmic thing where there's hundreds of thousands of options.
Visually, imagine a fractal that just keeps getting more complicated, like, oh, why can't we go back?
So pick a standard. If it's Avid DNX HD, fine. If it's Apple ProRes LT or ProRes 422 or HQ, fine. It doesn't really matter what it is, but pick a standard so that when your staff goes to find a file and diagnose a file, it knows the staff knows what they're looking at. They don't have to guess. And we were talking earlier about, everybody remember the flip phone or the flip camera or whatever? And I remember getting pulled into a session kind of like this and saying, what do you think of the flip? And I said, I wouldn't buy them. And, well, why not? Well, because it's vertical, it's proprietary, it doesn't fit anything else. And 2 years later, Cisco buys it and they're not in the video business. And they shut down the camera.
Well, they are and they aren't.
Well, they are and they aren't. But the point being is find a standard that is durable and sustainable and supportable by the industry so that your training of your staff, they become familiar with what that looks like, okay? And that migrates you from the acquisition piece into that post-production piece. And if you've got AVCHD in the field, and you've got AVCHD on a drive, and now I've got ProRes blown open, I'm back to having 2 copies of the media at least, okay? I can put it on a separate drive if need be, okay? And that gets us through that acquisition into post-production.
I find one of the hardest concepts to get across to people is that if they tell you they've got an AVI file or an MOV
Doesn't
file,
mean a thing.
they haven't actually said anything.
A wrapper is different than, does everybody understand the difference between data and metadata?
No.
Between the
All the
content of a
NSA,
wrapper.
ask them, they'll give the long details.
They're already listening, it doesn't matter.
So if
If
you have a WMV file or let's say an AVI file, what kind of video is it? Can you tell by looking at that extension? You cannot, because it's a wrapper. And inside that wrapper is the media, okay? And so...
But the extension literally has nothing to do with it. With the file itself, I mean, a file exists, the extensions are not there for any purpose other than for the programs to be able to key off the fact that, oh, this is an MOV, I'm probably going to be able to play this in QuickTime.
The extension exists so that your operating system knows what application to try to launch first.
But it precludes the fact that you try and open something in QuickTime, come to discover that it doesn't play ProRes 444 or it doesn't play whatever format you're trying to, Avid DNX, but it says .mov.
It's all very metaphysical. You are not your job. You are not the title that is applied to you. Sorry, I was going.
Nick, did you have something?
So I was just going to say, I mean, it's all well and good to try to figure out standards, and I completely agree and have standards for staff at our stations. We've tried really hard to acquire in the same format that we're going to edit in, and so that we don't do a whole lot of having to blow open the ProRes, Apple ProRes for editing. The issue becomes when you're trying to have your public, your public access folks, they're editing in whatever they can deal with, and they are outputting in whatever.
Oh, no. Here's the thing. It's your facility, okay? You are the gatekeeper.
Right, no, I agree. I agree with everything you just said. However, I'm more in favor of products that will, like, for example, the reason why we invested in Episode, Telestream Episode Pro is because if you give me a ridiculous codec in a container, I can deal with it and put it into the format.
It transcodes 85% of everything.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
But I would say to you, you are far better off with limited resources and limited staff time in being draconian in your standards enforcement, so that, and what we say basically is we won't support it. If you have a problem with a file type other than X, Y, and Z, we will not support you. You're welcome to try it on your own. Go and be blessed. There's the edit station. But staff will not spend a minute of time trying to solve your problem. Now, that may sound harsh, but I don't have the time or the resources to train staff to troubleshoot public content coming in from who knows where, okay? Now, we set up certain things for, like the GoPro, the Heroes, for DSLRs. We recognize there are specific workflow patterns, but the first thing that happens is they come in from, MP4, generally speaking in the DSLR, immediately into ProRes, again, in the post-production platform. And so my best practice that I would offer to you is be more restrictive than permissive when it comes to file formats. It will save your staff time and headaches.
It's not different from where we came from. We either had a three-port facility,
Well, yeah.
SVHS facility.
Yeah, if somebody walked in with an M2 and you didn't have an M2 deck, what would you do?
If somebody walked in with an M2, I'd definitely bet. Seriously, Todd, some of the lingo is just like going.
Okay, M2 was a tape format that NBC adopted for a short period.
I also thought it was a gun at first.
Okay.
I was like, I think my dad has one of those in the
I
cabinet.
think
I don't know.
Chavelle's point is more to the point. If somebody walked in with a three-quarter deck and you don't have a three-quarter deck, what did you say to them? I'm sorry, I can't help you. So why do we, in this new digital video world, assume that it's our responsibility to be fully accepting?
Because before, when there was a 3/4 inch deck, an SVHS, a VHS deck, and maybe you had a DV tape, okay? We had 5 possibilities. Now we have, what did you say, 100,000 possibilities? I have producers that are 85 years old.
Okay.
And what am I going to say to this producer who toddles in with his thing that he's so proud of because he actually edited it on his computer at home? Sorry?
Thank you.
I'm not going to say that.
Take your dirty files to YouTube, Pippi. We don't want your type in here with your 4Bs and
the
whatnot.
question for you as a manager is, what am I willing to do with regard to both physical and staff resources to accommodate this individual?
You find a transcoding software that's going to do 85% of those
Okay,
things.
and that is certainly an acceptable. But I think, and I'm not saying that you don't make those kind of accommodations at all. But I'm saying I would start with a standards-based approach first.
Or you tell them to burn it on a DVD and we'll encode it for you, which is our other.
That could be.
So I just, I'm sorry, so what was it?
I would just reroute, what I do in this video, people do that is they upload to YouTube and we route YouTube through the switcher and play it.
So my joke was also factual.
So are you, well then I'll ask the question. Let me play devil's advocate. Are you happy with that quality?
No, but it's better than nothing.
Is
I
it?
get producers come.
Let me ask the room.
Yes,
Is it better than
I have
nothing?
an hour and a half to put the show on, then, yeah.
And see, that's going to be one of those individual, your local community, your users, you're going to have to answer that question. Sometimes Skype in the middle of an Indonesian tidal wave is better than nothing. It's not, there's no hard and fast rules here. We can say this is guidelines or these are best practices, but there are always you know, exceptions to the rule.
I think it depends on where in the production flow you are. I mean, if someone is bringing you a file for broadcasting that's going to go on the air in 2 weeks, you can say, go away and bring that back when it's in the format that we'll support. But if they're the guest on a show that's going to be taped in 45 minutes, and they've brought in their hot little hand a flash drive that's got some file on it, and it's either figure it out or say, we're not going to do the show tonight.
Sure.
So I was just going to say, so Nancy, your server will play out, I don't know, like 8 different standard definition formats, and the HD one plays out, you know, 10 or 12, and every editing program has presets where you can tell it what to export. So it just seems like you should be able to tell them, like give them a list of the formats that the server will accept, and then tell them
And
to
we
just
do.
export it that way.
We do. But what Todd was saying about the draconian measures, we're an access center.
Right.
And there are certain producers that you can give them their standards, and they're going to look at it and go, okay, and then they go back to their home computer and they produce blah blah blah.
They use the video
So
that came on it, and they come up with MPEG-1.
I think that you've also got to make some sort of you've got to make some sort of a thing where, yes, try to bring it to us on the flash drive in this format, but as a backup, make a DVD and bring it along. And that way, at least you've got something that's a little bit friendly, so that when he drives all the way from the ponds of Plymouth, and
Is this a sports prediction?
No. I'm talking about the 85-year-old guy who's been producing programming for 20 years. When he comes, he isn't going to get turned away at the door to go a half an hour back to his house and then have to redo it. So I'm just saying that there are certain.
And we can always find the but what if.
Right.
Well,
Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
Why do you call yourself community media if you cannot help the public in that way?
And the goal here, when you publish a standard, is you want to train the public to use the standard because it's more efficient for everybody. It's not to turn them away.
Right.
It's to say, it's like we drive on the right-hand side of the road. Okay? If you were from the Britain and you came over, well, we wouldn't just let you drive on the other side of the road. You know, we hold people to standards. Now that's a bit of an extreme. But I also would caution you that you can spend a whole lot of time chasing rabbits, trying to fix something that may not even be a playable file, and you'll never know. We've had people come in with a DVD say, yeah, this was a such and such that my so-and-so did and I want to play it. And we take a look at it, we spend 10 minutes, I can't figure out where, you know, there's no clue as to what format this thing
And
would
that's
be.
okay.
You know.
That's really okay.
So publishing standards that are draconian was the purpose. You can deviate from that based on your local application. So we've kind of talked about, yes?
So do you have some, excuse me, do you have some suggestions for what files we should tell people?
Which draconian standard?
Mark, what are your standards in your place?
Well, our TriCaster allows us to record in QuickTime, allows us to record in AVI, MPEG-2, MPEG-3, and a few others. What we've done is we've set it up so that the standard show that produces at our station records in MPEG-2 420. And that's just across the board. We have a number of shows that have elected to do QuickTime or H.264 or something else. We've advised them that that's not the standard that we're working with, and that has to be edited because the MPEG-2 420 can go straight into our playback system, no problems whatsoever.
And I think what he just said is the key. We've started at the beginning of the process, but your standards are tied to the end of the process. What are your deliverables? Are we delivering to YouTube, to DVD, to Tightrope, to TelView? What will those standards accept? And how do we back through the workflow? So when you buy a camera, you're going to decide what your acquisition format is. Panasonic, you're going to get ABC HD or ABC Intra. Sony, you're going to get XD Cam with about 3 different flavors that I couldn't believe. But when you buy a camera, you're going to get that. When you buy a server, you're going to get a certain set of things that it will play. And then you've got your web or what other publication channels that you have. So those are your starting points. Those are defined for you by the manufacturers and by your content distribution network or your web service provider, whatever that is. Then you take your steps inside. What am I going to edit with? Am I Premiere? Am I Avid? Am I Apple? Most of that is resolved internally. Apple would like you to edit in ProRes. Avid would like you to edit in DNX HD. Those are somewhat going to be defined, but you can change them too. Okay? The piece we haven't really talked about is kind of studio acquisition or that extended field acquisition. And now you're talking about your AJA Key Pros, your Key Pro Racks, your Blackmagic HyperDecks, your Atomos Ninja and Samurais. You've got a lot of options out there now for what we would call field acquisition or studio acquisition.
Ross Blackstorm video servers, Grass Valley K2.
Yep.
All of these are things that the court can drive. Yes.
And what I would say to you is if you can match that format to your post-production format, you're ahead of the game. And now whether it's network connected or it's a removable drive, if I can walk away from my studio recording with Apple ProRes and drop it straight into my post-production, or if I'm on Avid, DNX HD and straight into post-production, just by drag and dropping files, that is a best practice. Are there other ways to do it? Sure. And so you look at your hardware that you're using and you start at the ends and you work your way to the middle. And I think most of those questions end up answering themselves. Yes.
So you're talking from, say, Premiere Pro or Final Cut, you're compressing to ProRes, which you do, and that file is then played in the middle of your live studio show? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, that's a different piece.
Yeah, that's the piece that
Okay, so we'll come back to that in a minute, because that also gets back to archival issues that Chris was asking about earlier. Right now, we're talking about if I'm going into my studio and I have a Key Pro rack that I'm going to record on, what do I record in?
Yeah, it's studio servers.
From the producers bringing in their files.
Right, and the servers that do linear playout on your channels are different than the servers that you're going to be using in the studios for actual, drop-ins or roll, B-roll tapes for those of us that know what B-roll is.
Roll.
There's also another aspect to a lot of that. Depending on how you capture it, a lot of those systems don't necessarily record in codecs that your home user is going to be able to read. Right? I've actually had that problem a number of times with producers saying, I can't watch this video. Even after they've installed the codec, it may not play in Windows Media Player, but it does play in QuickTime.
VLC. I'm sure everybody here is going to tell people, go get this program called VLC, and then you can open it.
It's the one with the cone.
Just don't assume it will play anywhere else.
Yeah.
Right.
So our standard at the station is I have a flash drive with all the codecs that the TriCaster records in. And anybody that, any new producer, all the old ones I've already talked to, but anytime somebody new comes in, anytime they take footage off the TriCaster, I also drop on the codecs so that they can install those on any home computer or wherever else they need.
That's what it's for.
And that just goes into making sure that I know they're not going to be able to find these codecs online because I have to download them specifically from my login with the New Tech site. And yeah, distributing them on the website, that's useful for the 95% of our producers that actually have emails and know how to go online, but we do have a few that need to be able to deal with it locally. They still can't get into that internet thing, and so having a physical local copy that I can hand off to them is very useful.
So, does that answer your question about kind of how the format structure looks? And there's no, we can get in a little bit later in a little more detail. But the reality is much of your standards will be driven by the hardware at the beginning and the end of the process, your cameras and your playback server and what they like. And then your intermediate piece, whether it's Premiere Pro, Avid, or Final Cut, and then what you buy for your studio. So for instance, Blackmagic's record decks for a while only recorded Apple ProRes HQ. They didn't have the standard, and so you get this file that is I don't know how many gigs per hour. I mean, it's monstrous.
It's like 60 gigs an hour.
60 gigs an hour. And so, you know, it wasn't very helpful. So, you know, those hardware choices will drive some of those standards that you end up putting in place.
And by the same token, it doesn't necessarily have to be a hardware drive. You know, I mean, that's one model.
Right.
The other model is you can start with something philosophical. You could start with, well, you know, we really want to be 1080i, and we're a Mac environment, so that means we're going to be editing on Mac computers, and then you start drilling into it. Well, I can teach Premiere better than I can teach Final Cut, or I can teach Final Cut better than I can teach Premiere, or I have these professional editors that keep coming in, we're going to use Avid. So you can start with that and work your way in, and all of a sudden you go, okay, well, I'm using Mac computers with Avid, so I'm going to work with the DNX environment, and then you can start working out toward the other ends where you look back toward the cameras. Which cameras can capture 1080i Avid DNX, direct to disk, or a format that can go directly into.
Closer to iron.
Well, it depends very heavily on the facility. I mean, you know, I've heard everything from facilities that are teaching Windows Movie Maker on Windows XP, all the way up through facilities that are doing full-blown Avid Symphony, and it depends on the people that you're dealing with.
And on that, just for 1 second, there's, I think, different philosophies. Some stations have everybody really editing there at the facility using a very consistent platform. When I was in Grand Rapids, they had Media 100, and then they transitioned to something that nobody else in the world had. I think nobody else with Velocity, some sort of thing that I'd never seen in another access station. People come learn that. And then other places have people just using whatever claim on their laptop or wide variety at home. And it is much harder to support that, but then you're leveraging their local equipment, and you can't really dictate what platform they're going to use at their house, because it's like, oh yeah, just buy this $2,000 version or this $600 version. It'll change in 6 months.
But the back end of that is making a policy decision about how much resource you have to go after and support it, and that's a hard question.
I mean, it depends on the level, you know, the staff that you're working with and what their core competency is. I was in a facility a couple weeks back, and I'm there, I'm installing some streaming equipment, and a woman comes in from the other room, and she was a member, and she goes, you know, hey Greg, can you come in and help me? I'm trying to log into OkCupid and I'm having some trouble. And I swear to God that I looked at him and I'm like, did she just say she wants to log into OkCupid? Like, you're a media center. And he goes, we teach them anything they want to know, including OkCupid. And he got up from what he was doing, went in the other room, and he helped her log into OkCupid. And so there's certainly an extreme example for sure, but there's definitely a balance between, you know, what your core mission is as a media center and what you can, you know, the tools that you can use to harness this. And that's really, for me, what it all gets pulled back to is all of this stuff that we're talking about. I mean, for some of us it's fun, for others it's the bane of our existence, but for even more it's both. But the technology that we're talking about, the technology that you need to harness is really just so that you can produce media. Right. And that's what it's all about.
Sure. And I think another client that often gets overlooked because they're not always in your face is the viewer, and how are they taking in that information? Are you getting more people through your website, on your stream? Are you getting more people watching your channel, which we can almost never find out because they don't tell us who's actually watching the channel. But that can be another factor that drives where you're putting your focus in your efforts, because it's really, you have different communities. The communities are different. That's why you need community outlets. They're not all the same. So in some communities, you're going to need to do something where you're dealing with OkCupid. In some communities, in Pasadena, you know, we're spitting instance from Hollywood. There's Avid, there's Final Cut, they're all over the place, and people expect things to look a certain way, and you can actually lose your, I don't know if it's profitability, but you can lose your audience because it just doesn't look that good. And the people that are in the community I live in and that I work in that industry, and when they see something that doesn't look the way they want it to look, or it doesn't fit the mold they expect it to fit, you begin to lose your immediate audience, which is your producers, because they're not getting the feedback they want, and the audience isn't getting feedback they want. So you have to go back and review your core audience, your producers, your viewers, and it's, you know, it's a balancing act you could ride for.
Real quick, and just an illustration of what distribution could look like. So we have a synergy system. We can play back either standard def or HD on the server. We have the city, so we just did 9 candidates worth of local elections, were off-year elections. So we published an HD, MPEG 2 HD for our playback, or HD is 264, HD 64 on this one. We published a 300K WMV so that the city could post it on their website. They didn't want a cross-link. They wanted a 300K WMV. And then we were sending up full HD to Vimeo for our website.
How many people knew that MPEG 2 can actually be high def? Okay.
That's good.
MPEG 2 can be HD. You know, a lot of people think MPEG 2 is a very dirty word. But you know, it really is what drives the cable industry. It is the core format and standard. The major cable providers have something in the order of 30 or 40 million set-top boxes in the field deployed that can only ever decode MPEG 2. So it is a format that is very heavily rooted in cable and certainly in access as a result, that it'll be around for the next decade or two. Definitely.
Yes, sir.
I think what's most frustrating for me is, you know, when we were building at CMAP first and then at CTV, we almost went backwards. We went to distribution and said, look, you know, we want to, we're chartered. We want to join your, you know, essentially your regional access network. We want to be on your IP network. And that defined what our codec was, what our container is, what our megabits, you know, what our bit rate is. It defined all that. And then when we worked back from that, the next question was, okay, we got to get everything into this format, period. Because there is no, you know, there's no analog component for me. I'm sending, you know, packets to Charter, and they have to be, if it's out of sync at all, they call me up. This doesn't work. So, so I think that's a difference in the digital. You know, when we actually start transmitting digital to the cable companies, that becomes a difference. We have to work backwards.
Sure. Well, and it's already happened. I mean, when we moved into our new facility 7 years ago, we took a standard definition SDI with embedded audio, and we fed it to 2 cable systems. One went through a D to A back to analog through an analog modulator, and then got muxed onto a fiber and fibered over to Charter.
Oh, that's so infuriating.
The other one kept HDSDI with embedded audio to an encoder. They encoded it to the QAM digital, multiplexed the 2 channels together, shot it over ASI, and then rebuilt the analog channel once it got to the head end, until a week ago when they dropped our analog channels on Time Warner. And so we've been doing digital delivery, ASI IP, for 6-7 years out of our facility because there were constrained fiber link between the head end and our location. And that's where we get to, and this is, we can talk a little bit with our 2 vendors here. When you get into the scenario that you're in and you're looking at an IP-based delivery, you know, there are 2 philosophies here at this table about how to do that. You can take a straight video playback, feed it into an encoder, and multiplex at ASI and send it over. Or you can tinker with it in the IP realm and deal with it as an IP playback server and deal with it that way. And I'm going to stand as the moderator and say neither one is right or wrong. It's an approach to a technical solution. Okay? And so when you're looking at, if you have the opportunity as you did to say what's my best solution for this problem, and you have the budget, you know, if you're in a cable renegotiation, for instance, looking at, you know, how you're going to get to IP is probably a good question. Are you going to do it with a traditional video playback environment and then an encoded solution? Because one of the things that does is it gives you a nice hardware compressor that's going to take everything and legalize it and legitimize it and give them that stream that they're looking for. Okay? And you can deal with everything upstream in video. Your keying, your bugs, everything happens in video, which most of us understand. You can do all the same things in IP. It's a little more complex technically, but deliver that same IP signal. And so there's more than one way to come across with that. Anybody? You want to? There'll
Yeah,
be
you know,
other
yeah, I
benefits
mean,
of doing it one way or the other.
you know, there's benefits to doing it both ways. I mean, you know, the primary benefit to doing it with video, aside from the fact that we all understand it, is that it's easy to troubleshoot. You get a monitor, you take a spigot, you plug it into the back of the monitor, yep, it's there. Next, no, oh, problem must be here. We'll talk a little bit about that. We've got a troubleshooting workflows.
Yes, we do.
Okay, we've got a troubleshooting workflows thing tomorrow at some point.
10 something.
10 something?
10:45.
I'm not going to be up until at least 11.
That's okay, the first 15 minutes will be troubleshooting without Chris, and when everybody's totally lost, Chris will wander in and hang over. Listen.
So, I mean, there's the added benefit to that. The benefit of an IP workflow with, you know, or excuse me, with troubleshooting on the other hand, is there's a lot more advanced tools and more automated tools that are very readily deployable to be able to say, okay, I need to monitor these 6,000 channels all at the same time. And there's applications that do that. And then we'll send you emails, oh, that channel went away, or something along those lines. There's benefits and drawbacks to both, you know, and you know, what I will say, at least in the near term, however, your control rooms will all be SDI. And there's discussion basically, I mean, I've read a lot of articles basically saying that SDI video cable and SDI as a standard is going to go away at some point, and it probably will. It'll probably all be replaced with twisted pair data cable. But the problem right now is, in particular with anything IP, is that there's a certain latency associated with it. With video, it's instantaneous, because you're dealing with voltages that are very finite, and they happen, and you see it, and it's done. With IP, there's an encode step, there's a transmit step, there's a decode step. And once,
buffering.
Yeah, there's buffering within the stream itself, there's all of these various, very, very complicated scenarios, and that adds latency. And so you can't have a studio shoot where you have 3 cameras and all the encoders are just off a little tiny bit. So when you're switching between the cameras all of a sudden, you go from one has lip sync, the other one happened 3 seconds ago. You can't do it. It just doesn't work.
Okay, now let me say, on the other hand, if you're going inexpensive with, let's say, a certain national brand of hardware, you will develop delay and latency in your HD video system, and you will have to delay your audio to keep up. Whether you're doing audio embedding, whether you're doing disembedding, up conversions or down conversions, you're adding delay. So I don't want, what Chris said is true on its face as a global truth. At the same time, depending on how you design and with what hardware you design, you will find, and we just did an install a year and a half ago or so down in Long Beach, and we ended up with about a 3-frame delay through the system by the time we got everything done and everything into the switcher, and through to the recorder, we had to add about a 3-frame delay to drag the audio to get it back in sync as it hit the recorders on the embedded stuff. So that's one thing as you look at your digital rollout, is when you discuss with your switcher manufacturer what its input phase is and what its frame syncs, what its total delay is in its system, because you end up having to compensate for that.
Spoiler alert, they all lie.
And they all lie.
They all lie. Every one of those standards that you read is wrong.
So you need to be a lot more knowledgeable to ask the questions, and then you need to doubt everything they say, and find a way to measure it, and
well, you need an engineer who's going to make it work at the end of the day, whether that's your systems integrator or someone that's on staff, someone who's going to sit down when everything's done and installed and do a sync test and make sure that you're back in sync.
So just on the subject of you know,
and I haven't forgotten your
IP solution, and you're saying neither one is right or wrong. And I wanted to be as smart as to say they're both right and wrong.
Right.
Because I mean, as we've already said, there's benefits and costs of both. One of the things that you get when you're dealing with SDI that I was struggling with when I was selling the IP system is that you get the ability to incorporate third-party things like a backup signal detector that notices in the second that there's black frame or whatnot, and you can have backup video devices that are running and replacing it. And when you deal in the IP world, you are maybe dealing with that kind of stuff on a different scale. You're dealing with stuff that's built to, like Chris said, watch thousands of streams with a cable company, and it's a different scale of operations. Not only setting it up and troubleshooting it, but implementing backups and incorporating the other technology that you have.
And as a result, the systems scale at different cost points too. You know, you'll reach a point with an SDI system, an SDI platform, which I love SDI, don't get me wrong, where it will actually make more sense to be able to do something IP because of the cost differential between the two. And there's a balancing point that you reach. You know, you end up buying a 1024 by 1024 router because you needed something that big. It costs you $400,000 when you could have done it a lot less expensive with switches that would have totaled $100 grand.
Well, and I'll throw a monkey wrench into both of them. There's a company called C-Change that's been doing cable distribution for years, and I think their small system is like 64 channels.
Yes.
And it goes 64 channels straight. It's a little box, and it just shows 64 channels out, just because it's what they designed it to do. So it's, you know, it really depends on the tool.
So when you get your
and the
64
job.
peg channels, that's what you guys want to buy. Everybody write it down. When I get
Anybody wants to
64 peg
feed
channels,
64 peg channels, I recommend C-Change.
you get 20, go to Telview.
But it's a tool.
If you got 2 or 3.
Remember that it's a tool, and you're trying to get a job done within a budget. I mean, that's really what all this boils down to. Chris had a good archive question. You had a question about playback. So one of the questions in a digital environment is, how do we end up rolling in content? And the question is going to vary depending on the hardware that you select, just like it did when you had tape machines. If you go with something like a new tech or broadcast picks, generally speaking, they have media players built in. And so that media player will have you're running the new tech?
We are.
So what does it support for file playback?
All right, well, the new tech allows us to go in one of a couple of different directions. It has network inputs, so I can actually stream a desktop from a computer directly into the switcher. I can take...
Just never quite got why that would be a desirable effect.
Skype interviews.
Okay, oh, there you go, Skype.
Yeah, so we actually do a number of Skype interviews with people across, well, we had somebody from the East Coast recently. And it's a lot cheaper to do Skype than it is to fly over.
Really?
Are you?
I came for steak.
My name is Mark.
Mark. Okay. My name is Manu. How about the Google Hangouts?
Yeah, we use those as well.
Well, which one do you prefer, the Skype or the Google Hangouts?
It really depends on which route you want to go. Google Hangouts is great if you've got a group of people. Skype is better if you have a single person. Be aware, though, that Skype also has broadcast regulations where you're required to include their logo if you are going to use them on any broadcast, well, actually use their service at all.
One thing I will also echo about Skype, I mean, having used it in the professional broadcast arena frequently, is that they do a significantly better job with making sure the audio is there. So while we're all up here talking about video codecs and compression technologies, nobody really gives a damn about that at home. Because if they can't hear it, if you can't hear it, it's worthless anyways. And TV as a medium, I mean, you know, I've done a lot of work in master control scenarios where you sit there for 8 hours and you watch television. And silence is the single scariest thing ever. Because you're sitting there, you're doing 16 million other things, and all of a sudden there's no audio. And you go, grrr, because you have no idea what's going on. People will tolerate things, people will always tolerate bad video if the audio is good. Always. So, I mean, something to bear in mind, you know, as you're picking something like a Skype or a Google Hangouts or whatnot, pick the one that's going to have the better audio transmission capabilities. And Skype will hang on a freeze frame if it has no bandwidth, but that audio keeps coming in and doesn't break up. So very, very important as you're looking at that as a solution.
On top of that, be aware that you have to send a mix-minus feed of audio back. Otherwise, you confuse the person on the other end.
Does everyone know what mix-minus is? As a former satellite truck operator, I will say the bane of it will come. What I'd like to do here.
As a former ENG operator, we hate you.
No, we know what mix-minus is. There is apple cider and some snacks in the hallway. Let's take a 5-minute break.
Mix-minus real quick is the audio minus the person who's talking, so that you're not hearing yourself.
I'm going to do that after the...
I know, but everyone's hanging. I'm sitting here going, tell them! Tell them!
We want to come back. So let's take 5 minutes, and we're going to come back and we're going to get into archive and how we try to capture all this stuff in perpetuity. So 5 minutes.
I think out here is more.
That's someone born and raised in the Bay Area. I know exactly where you're
When last we left, we were getting ready to discuss production playback. And we had some questions about how people are handling roll-ins in the studio, for instance. So Mark had just kind of started talking about how the new tech, and I can say, I think, with a fair amount of accuracy, that things like the broadcast picks handle it somewhat similarly to the way the new tech does.
Actually, I have experience with the A10 from Blackmagic, the broadcast picks, and the broadcast pick, because the A10 and the broadcast picks are out of cities.
Oh,
so we end up actually using all three of them. I'll start off with the TriCaster. You've got 8 video inputs with the 855 or with the 455. You obviously have the option of just connecting a physical device such as a DVD player directly to one of the inputs. You can also go and get something like a converter box, either one of the mini converters from Blackmagic or AJA, or you can just do something like a Canopus video converter or any of those, and you can just get a video signal. That's sort of the analog methodology that a lot of people are probably used to using. Some of the newer technology includes doing network connections, where you, as long as both the TriCaster and the computer are on the same network, you add a little bit of software to the computer, and you can either transmit a region or the entire desktop to the TriCaster to be shown as a video source. There are some requirements in terms of screen resolution and stuff like that, but I think the software for the most part deals with that. I generally try and just make sure it's a standard video format for the monitor. If you are the TriCaster is also supposed to be able to do AirPlay from Mac devices. I have actually managed to get a video signal from my Android tablet to it, but it's been a little weird, so it's not reliable yet.
Actually, I tried over at CMAP. They have a TriCaster there, and what you're telling me, everything that you said, I have done.
Yeah.
It's really cool. But when I went to that AirPlay for the iPhone, you know, we were able to resolve that.
Well, yes, with Apple it works just fine, but with Android and other devices that try and emulate the same signal over the network, you can have issues. And it has to do with what app you're using, what device, what OS it's running, and that sort of stuff. So the technology is definitely there to start doing wireless transmission to the systems. You, again, are going to have the same latency issues that we were talking about with the transmission via video cable or network. But it is a fairly small latency, and if you are running something like Skype or Google Plus over it, you're already sort of anticipating some latency, and so it doesn't become as obvious. If you are just doing a presentation off of a tablet, it's not as obvious because, well, when you hit next, the people in the audience don't necessarily get to see that right off. So it's, again, not a huge issue. But if you are trying to do wireless video, for example, I can take a GoPro and wirelessly stream video to my tablet. I have seen it actually stream to a VLC player as well on a computer. And so you can potentially take that signal and route it into devices, and as that technology progresses, you are going to still see that latency. I think you're looking at a second and a half for the GoPro. With the newest GoPro, it's about 3 seconds with the 3. But
when we're talking latency, we're not necessarily talking a shift between the audio and video by 3 seconds. It's more the delay that's associated. Like, I'm an anchor in Boston talking to my counterpart in Raleigh, and I go, we go live to Daniel Krozik in Raleigh, North Carolina as we watch Hurricane Abigail bear down. Daniel, how's it going?
2, 3.
Thanks, Chris!
But wait a minute, how come I don't see that on Democracy Now when they're like, you have some of their staff members over in Israel or
So there's two things. A, sometimes people are using a technology that lets them have a shorter delay. And B, if you know what you're doing, you learn how to anticipate certain cues. And I don't wait until he says the end of my name and I hear it. He goes, we're going to, and I know he's going to take 3 seconds to say my name. So when I worked at LiveView, it was about a 4-second delay often from the live shot for the backpacks. And some of the customers in the pro news arena figured out ways to compensate so that it was no problem at all. And sometimes I get clips, and you would see the guy for like 4 seconds standing there. Yes, we're here today, having a great time, and it's just painful.
It's not so bad as long as you don't try to interact. You
That's
go
right.
to him, talk,
Right.
and then come back.
Especially when you try to cut somebody off, then it gets really confusing.
You talked a little bit about the embedded players and the
Right.
format compatibility.
Okay, so the TriCaster, it's embedded media player. It's got 2 decks basically, and when you're importing footage, you actually have to do this before the show. You can't. Well, you can, but it's not advisable to. But during the pre-production, while you're setting up the set, you're doing titles, all of that, you import all the footage. That's photos, that's audio, that's video. TriCaster has the option to encode as you import. That means what it's going to do is it's going to take whatever video codec that it was in, and it's going to transfer it to something that the TriCaster uses. And that's just internal. Now, that also brings it into the project for your show. So it's no longer on the external hard drive that you have attached to the TriCaster, which is a very important step, because if you've got a USB 1.0 flash drive or hard drive, you are not going to get the speed you need. 2.0, you're right there at the limit. 3.0 is definitely recommended. By the way, this does not have FireWire, and the eSATA does work. So if you've got those options, but a lot of people have the mobile hard drives or thumb drives, so USB 3.0 is definitely a suggestion for that.
You want to remember too that there's a difference between megabits per second and megabytes per second. So the speeds that we're all talking about are megabits per second. There's 8 bits in 1 byte. So if you've got a 40 megabyte file, 40 times 8, 320, it's 320 bits in that 40 megabyte file. So that's something to bear in mind here as we start talking about transfer speeds in any environment. If you've got a file, a video file, an HD video file that's 19 megabits per second, and you're trying to stuff it across a USB 1.1 interface at 11 megabits per second, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
In real time, at least.
Now, to take a look at both the Broadcast Fix and the Blackmagic one. The Blackmagic has they've actually reversed their cost options, whereas the switcher itself costs $1,000 versus the software interface ends up costing you about $5,000 or $6,000 or something like that. The other ones are all reversed. The hardware costs you a ton. The computer software thing will cost you more on the other. So what you end up with is with Blackmagic, it's got, I think, 120 seconds of playable video.
Doesn't really work very well.
No, it's good for if you have a intro title sequence. So you've got a motion graphic that comes in, and then you go to your thing. That's about what it's good for.
And a lot of these were originally intended, that's actually a legacy from the original video switchers, the Grass Valleys and the Sonys, that would give you a clip store, basically, a media store within the switcher, or a still store even, where you could only store, let's say, 1,000 frames. Sony's top-of-the-line switcher can literally only store 1,000 frames of video, and what that's really intended for is like these swoosh transitions that you see. So the art department makes a 30-second clip, video and key, and that, 30-frame clip, 1 second, and then you import that as 60 frames, and it takes up 60 frames of your 1,000-frame allotment. And it's very much the same idea. Ross does something very similar as well in their platforms, where they're expecting that you're going to play video off of another server or another source, as opposed to relying on its internal storage like TriCaster and Broadcast Pix.
And Broadcast Pix is another box device, whereas the Blackmagic looks about as big as its video router. It's only about that thick, that long, that tall, and it fits on the rack mount. All the Broadcast Pix and the TriCaster, they're big boxes.
They're both PC based.
PC based. And so you need a ton of rack space for these as far as devices are concerned. And they all have internal hard drives capable of a lot of storage. We, at least at the cities, we don't use the media playback functions. We usually just use still store options for bringing up a recess tag or a lower third, that sort of thing. But and so with those things in mind, their media selection options are a little bit harder to get to. TriCaster went with a operator, somebody with a keyboard and mouse that's helping to select things. The other two, it's on the switcher panel, you've got directional buttons that you're selecting things. So it's not quite as efficient for finding the media files, but it is certainly it works once you get the workflow down.
And in terms of standalone products, for those of you looking for something, I come from a very traditional TV background. I sit down behind a TriCaster and I literally don't know how to use it. You put me behind a Sony switcher and I can figure it out. Long story. There's definitely a lot of server-based solutions, and in my opinion, a standalone playback server is a great way to go. I've got experience with some of the Ross products. They've got their Black Storm video server and the Soft Metal server, worst name ever. Both are capable of basically playing back files that would come from edit. So you're talking about MOVs or AVI files, your MOV and AVI files, generally speaking. They'll handle some ProRes stuff. They'll handle some Avid DNX. There's probably about a dozen codecs that these will handle from Ross, and they work pretty well. And you can get a software control or a hardware control. It'll integrate via VDCP, which is a control protocol that switchers talk, so that you could use your integrated switcher buttons to hit play, and it triggers a VDCP command basically to start rolling a clip. That's really what you need. Avid makes a product called Airspeed that's probably going to be more expensive than most people's playback servers. But the Airspeeds are fantastic platforms if you can afford them. Worked extensively with that. You've got Miranda and Ebert's really starting to get involved with some of these as well, where they've got some low-end, not low-end, mid-grade play-out solutions that could go into a control room style scenario. Grass Valley makes one, is the K2?
Yeah.
The K2 platform, which is another roll-in server by Grass Valley, and there's one other that
Well, I can tell you what we're deploying. In our studio, we have either Key Pro racks or we have Blackmagic, which is which one would it be? The HyperDeck Studio, right? It takes a little bit of tinkering to get the file export correct for the Blackmagic. The Key Pro is much more forgiving. In our truck that we're building, we will actually have a couple of HyperDeck devices, and then we'll also have the TRMS, the Z-Play system, primarily because we'll be doing sports, but we'll also use it as a clip server. So that's a fairly inexpensive 4-channel replay box.
Another clip playout server for your control room, and this is going to sound totally ridiculous and very access. An edit workstation with an output hooked up into your switcher. And the reason I say that is because there's zero learning curve for people that are already using the editing software. You know, it's not really the most professional thing in the world, but that's okay, it works. You drop the clips on the timeline, you hit the space bar when you want to play it.
So that was actually what I was going to ask about is if anybody had any hacky ways that they have started doing roll-ins at their station, and you bring up NLEs, and I've actually seen a variety of people do that in different ways. Does anybody here have any ways that they take a file live? Go ahead.
You can also use, there's a program called QLab that was originally designed for
Q as in CUE or Q
as in Q Lab.
Okay.
And it was originally designed for theatrical video and audio playback, but literally you can, in pre-production, script out when you want the videos to play, and then for your operator scenario, if you're worried about learning curve, you hit the go button, and like literally there's a go button that's where you click it, and
it's like radio automation.
The video plays, right, exactly, and so that's an option too.
So one of the things we found is that we've gone on eBay and found a couple of DNF controllers, and we put them up to the KeyPro racks, and it makes for really nice. You can get the standard ones where they just use it to fast forward and step through to the next clip. And we actually found one with 99 memories you can go through and set up bookmarks per show, and you can actually get the DNF working with the AJA. So there's a lot of things that you can do if you want to get a little bit creative in figuring out, because it is just a VTR. I mean, it's still got that 9-pin 422, Sony protocol VTR emulator on the back of the thing. And so some of the things that control VTRs, you can, for that matter, there's no reason you couldn't hook it up to the same edit device and use it as a second storage system.
For those of you not familiar with DNF, they're like the gold standard of playback machine control. It's just a little box, looks like the old analog tape-to-tape dub stations, basically. But they've really done a great job. All of the slow-mo replay guys for major sporting events.
There's on the other side, has anybody ever hacked anything together using something really consumer level like an iPad or Android tablet where they convert out to HDMI and they're just getting play on the device? You guys have done something like that?
Like a Sony playback deck plays mini DV tapes, so if someone's got some special clip they want to play in the studio, we either do it like how you're saying with a workstation like that, and we export. We play back, but the trick is that we learn, you gotta make sure the computer does not sleep.
Right.
Turn off the sleep function, otherwise you get black screen.
Yeah.
But the second one, we use a playback deck. We tell them whatever you want. We'll put it on this tape, put time code readings of what clips when, and we try to work it out sequentially so that we can play all their clips that they want. So we got a mini deck with a video output to our switcher, or if they're not ready for that and they don't have a tape but they have the file, we just put it in the workstation and plug it in, just like that.
Okay. So a couple things that we've talked a little bit about playback. Some of you had specific questions. Does that kind of give you a sense of what's out there? You had a question too? Okay. One of the things I'm going to throw out there, I've done about 3 installs now, and I get about as angry at HDCP as I do about anything else in the world. For those of you who have not played a lot with HDMI, even consumer electronics, built into HDMI is a protocol called HDCP. And that is something, what is it?
High
definition copy protection.
Is it fair to call that macrovision for the 22nd century?
It's like moving the black level up to 7.5 IRV so that you can't dub from one deck to another.
Except that it's worse than that, because every DVD that you have authored for the last however many years of your career, if you throw it into a DVD player with an HDMI output and you plug it into a switcher, it won't play.
Period.
End of story.
Doesn't matter if you own the content, makes absolutely no difference. In order to have your HDMI implementation ratified, they force you to put HDCP enforcements onto the unit.
Except for the white knight. There's a company called a Pantech. And a Pantech, you didn't hear, no, turn that off.
Yeah.
Truly, seriously. I don't want to get them in trouble.
Just don't publish it.
Turn it off. The red light's on. I can see it.
You've already said the name. Come on. Really cheap electronics from China. Is there anything of that type?
HDCP. I mean, it's so ridiculous. If you don't have HDCP certification, you pay $6 or $8 a connector. If you're HDCP certified, you only pay like 50 cents or $1. I mean, it's just, It's train robbery. So if you take any DVD or Blu-ray content and run it through an HDMI spigot into a switcher, it will not play 99 times out of 100 unless you have authored it in a specific way to defeat the HDCP.
So it's not like with region coding where it used to be if you bought a $200 or $100 DVD player, it would do some things, but if you bought that $20 one online, it works fine because it came straight from the gray market.
If you take the analog HD outputs, YRB, and run them through a converter to SDI,
it's going to look as good.
It will bypass it.
And
it is the HDMI spigot that is causing the HDCP issue.
So to sum up, they finally made one nice, easy to use digital format for consumers, and they made it so you can't use it for your purposes.
There's also a Grass Valley frame sync that outputs in SDI that will do the same defeat, and the defeat is
Are you sure?
The reason the defeat works is because the way the protocol works is it basically sends low voltage information that says.
Is that the ADVCG2?
Yes.
Yeah, I've had problems. Double check and test with it because I've actually had problems with the G2. Okay. The last item that we have, and I don't want to help Chris here, we're going to start talking about archiving. Okay, and archiving was easy when you had master tapes and you put a master on it and you throw it in a box or you throw it in a cupboard and you knew you had your stuff. Throw it in the fire.
Except when you
had a fire.
Oh, if you had a fire, I wasn't sure.
Let's go archive this and all the other papers in that barrel over there. Who's got that big archive?
So at the beginning, we talked about, and our workflow really is you come in with this SDHC card, and we're going to have you transfer it to a hard drive. Remember, we have the distributed eSATA towers. You're going to throw it on that hard drive, and then you're going to take an immediate blow it open into ProRes. Okay, so now you have 2 copies, and you can always go back to that ADVC file structure if you have to. Okay, our particular application for archiving, and I'm going to throw it out because I'm curious to see what other people are doing. We then go through the post-production process, we finish the show, and we save the finished product and the project file and the ADVC file directory tree to Blu-ray. And that gives us the raw footage, the project file, and the finished show. And what we did is we balanced it so we could get a 30-minute program on a 25 gigabit HD Blu-ray platter. Sorry, Blu-ray, not HD. HD DVD died. That's too bad. My God. Anyway, it's a whole other war. So at the end of the day, you end up throwing away all that intermediate format, that Apple ProRes that takes up
hundreds of gigabytes.
He's got a story he'll tell in a minute. I'm curious though, I'm not sure that's the best. I know that it works. I know that after I pounded on staff for about 2 months, we've got it down to a science and we've got a couple hundred Blu-rays. Everything that we do now is archived off. We have the original ADVC raw footage, and we have the project files, and we have the finished show. Usually it's in H.264, and it's at a fairly high compression rate to get it all to fit.
But obviously the one issue is that you're still dealing with physical media.
Yep.
You know, and I've been to a lot of different facilities and nobody really has a great answer for this yet. You know, there's some facilities that LTO is more or less the de facto standard or the standard for archiving. It's a magnetic tape where you write data on it. But LTO loaders are expensive, LTO tape is expensive, and you need a management program to actually handle it.
Just to give you an idea, a 2-drive, 12-cartridge LTO library will run you for anywhere from $12,000 to $16,000.
And then,
and it's about $100 a tape, and that gets you what, a
64 gigs,
64
something like that.
Gigs. It's not a lot.
Or you can let the Internet Archive do it all for you. Where's your
Well, and we're going to get there anyway.
I tend to skew some of the more cloud-based methods, you know, because you don't. I was at one facility and I not joking. They're like, our fireproof safes are coming in tomorrow, so that we can take our DVD libraries and put them in there. And I'm like, that's great, that's wonderful. Well, how old are your DVDs? Oh, well, we've had them for 7 years. Okay, well, you know that those are written on organic vegetable dyes that will decompose.
Unless you go and you buy the archive product, and there's a whole conversation we can have about that if you want.
I thought for sure the DVDs were going to melt in the fireproof safe and just ooze out.
Yeah, that would be bad.
Like, our DVDs! It's just like a slurry.
So, you know, yes.
There is, have you guys ever thought about getting older people, like in native way, we call them storytellers? Let them archive this stuff. Just teasing you guys.
What they're gonna do? 110. It's gonna take a long time.
Slowest transfer rate ever.
And we could, you know, we could get 7 people and go parallel.
So physical media is not necessarily the best. The cloud is really going to be some of your best bet here. Amazon has their Glacier platform that I think I mentioned earlier. Their storage platform, the S2 platform, is not, it's expensive, but you're paying for instant availability spinning disks. You're going to be a lot better off, you know, I mean, for a number that's, let's call it $1 a gig per year. So, you know, it adds up quickly. Now, if you look at their prices on the Glacier platform, they're like 1/10 of that. And so what it really allows you to be able to do is using enterprise level storage that's duplicated and redundant, store very effectively, cost effectively, in perpetuity your programs.
If you have the bandwidth to upload it.
If you have bandwidth to upload it, which most of us at this point do.
At least at night.
Not in California?
Not in Ventura.
Well,
Texas is moving pretty rapid on high bandwidth, at least that's something I've read. They're AT&T, I think they're.
So tell us about archive.
Is there a session on archives that are worth
There is.
Is there?
I don't know, I'm just joking.
Give them a 3-minute
So
teaser.
real fast. So 10 years ago when I was doing Digital Bicycle, the Internet Archive was already up there doing the Prelinger archives, and we were like, oh cool, they've got all this ephemeral video, but they would never want our content, and they would never host our content for long term, and blah, blah, blah. So we need to build our own network to connect stations and share stuff. And that was wrong, and I was an idiot 10 years ago. And if we had just made a very simple way to push stuff to the archive and communicate with them and had them understand and maybe develop earlier an interest, all that stuff we were sharing 10 years ago on the Digital Bicycle as our test files would actually be downloadable today from the Internet Archive as an MPEG-2, as an H.264, as formats that weren't around back then. In fact, the only video that I did in all those years of gold that I can still find is the one that I put up on the Internet Archive as like a little video tribute to my old boss. And I found that the other day, and I was like, oh, I really should have put everything there. These days, there's a lot more maturity with the project focused on community media, and it's because John Hauser from Access Humboldt has been working really close with them for years. As they started taking more of an interest in bigger video projects, he got involved. There's now a community media archive that any one of us can contribute to from our station, and they'll take every single piece of media you want to put up there, and they will preserve it until the end of time, whatever that really means. I mean, they're dedicated to having multiple systems in multiple parts of the world, preserving your council meetings or your producers between two firms talk show. So take advantage of that. You don't have to pay for it, and in 5 years, when whatever commercial product was out there has decided it's no longer in their profitability, like Lip has to keep your stuff, it will still be on the archive. And I can talk more, but that's mine. And it's free and it's forever. Yes, and then go ahead. Go.
What is the address?
Archive.org. And it's the Internet Archive, and it's been funded by an internet millionaire who made a lot of money early on and who cares about this. But they've now got library status within California, so they're able to buy bandwidth at a much cheaper price. And they actually have an event going on tonight up in San Francisco that's open to the public, that if you weren't going to be here for the awesome reception and you somehow were going up to San Francisco, I would recommend going to. They're an old Christian Science church, like a temple to data that got racks in place of where the icon should be. It's really cool.
Mark, how is your station handling
All right, well, we're actually using YouTube as our big active backup. So we end up having a lot of our content just uploaded to YouTube so that people can actively see it, and it's a backup. Now that's not our local backup. We've also got a couple of hard drives here at the station that we back up to. We are looking at archive.org as well, peg.tv, and a few other options, but we are still trying to develop, or we're just waiting around to see which one wins.
We're still there.
Yeah, and we're trying to see where is going to be the most effective use of our hours. How much time do we have to put in managing these archives, making sure that they are still functional as we continue to use them.
So, go ahead. I just want to, there's two main types of archiving. You've got your nearline archive and then you've got your deep freeze. Who here thinks that every shred of every piece of media that you ever created is worth archiving? Okay.
Wow.
I would make the argument that a very, very important part of deep freeze archiving is culling out the crap. You know, there's going to be talk shows that 10 years from now have absolutely no relevance, and for you to continue to maintain that piece of data may be important to the producer, but is not necessarily important to your little piece of history. Yes?
So,
storytellers?
Kind of. Yeah. So, if we're going to get rid of, I'm the one who raised, so it seems like, okay, very few of them. But it's kind of, it's my opinion. What I see is that, why don't we just get rid of old people?
Well, hold on, there's a difference, hold on.
That's another panel tomorrow. How about the ice club? Everyone over there pays the bucks, but that's tomorrow night after we're over.
There's a difference between what you as an individual would choose to save and what organizations will choose to save with regard to our role in the community.
Yeah.
Okay, there is stuff that should never see the light of day that is B-roll or, you know, 13-to-1 shooting ratios when I send a brand new shooter out who doesn't know how to edit in the camera, edit in the lens, who comes back with, you know, 3 miles of, the camera turns on as he's driving back to the station. You know, that stuff should never, you know, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about old people.
But the reason you want to get rid of all this, what you say, crap or useless and stuff like that, is because there's an obstacle. The obstacle is that time and the space to put the information.
And I would argue relevance. I mean, if you throw stuff out there, everything becomes less valuable. If you curate a bit, and I'm not saying for content or for any other purpose, if you curate just a bit, it makes it more compelling for someone who just shows up and starts going through your stuff. If all he sees is, you know, a tree-lined street going by in the window, he might not stick around to see the election forum from our local city candidate who ends up becoming governor or president, you know. And so we, in a certain level, you have the ability to create value in what you curate.
Yes.
There's also the issue of being able to find specific things.
Yeah.
If you've got 33 million hours of video, how are you going to find the piece with Steve Smith, who was interviewed 10 years ago, who just died, and you want to have this thing? You're not going to be able to find it unless you have somebody, either an intern, a staff person, or whatever, entering metadata to every single piece of the shot. So other than doing that, there's really very little value in saving all of that.
Okay. And there's an appropriate archiving protocol, which is the other piece to that you need to keep that data alongside it.
Right, so you have to decide how much time you want to spend on doing that metadata. So then you've reduced it down to, instead of that, you do this.
Yes, it's like, but I think I read that for every minute that a person sees off of YouTube, 3 hours is being produced. So it's kind of like an information age.
Right, yeah.
And-
There's more media and data being produced now than there ever has in the history of time.
Okay, so.
The problem is not necessarily that all of that is going to be continually relevant. I mean, it's sort of it's the whole art thing. There is such thing as bad art.
Or identifiable.
I'll say it.
Well, but beyond the bad art.
It's in the eyes of the beholder.
But beyond that, you have to be able to catalog it and identify it and find it.
Yes.
And that's the key.
That is the
So-
key.
There's one other important thing, and that is in the future, you've got to be able to play it.
Yes.
If you had put a high 8 tape in the vault 10 years ago,
Yes.
you're probably out of luck because you threw out the high 8 decks some time ago. Now, the same thing
No, I
that
still got
happened
one.
to today's codecs is that I don't know if the system 10 years from now will be able to play.
All right, well, so really.
I know, but I do need a
Hold
playback.
on, real quick. So it's past 4 o'clock, the official portion of this workshop is over. I'm happy to sit here and to take questions. Daniel has a comment, but the West Region Chair, Mr. Jay Robertson, is in the house.
Thank you for that.
Boy, you guys, what a bunch of... Anyway, I just want to remind everybody that we will have the welcome reception at the beautiful Museum of Art here in San Jose. At 5 o'clock, we're asking everyone to start meeting us in the lobby. There will be probably, I'm going to lead one group, but we're going to try to get a group leader. And we're going to go across the street over behind the Matrix where the Metro station is. It's a $2 ride. And the Metro will take us right to the Museum of Art. So if you want to meet in the lobby, and it doesn't matter that you're there at 5, I think there's another one at 5:15. But just to let everybody know, meet in the lobby at 5 o'clock, and we'll start making sure everybody can get down to the welcome reception at the Museum of Art. Thank you.
All
Let's
right.
get back.